thank you very much for having me. It's quite an honor. This is a spectacular program you put together, and I'm honored to be a keynote speaker in your conference. The first thing I'll say is it takes me back to when I was a student, first as a post-baccalaureate pre-med student at Bryn Mawr College outside of Philadelphia, trying to put together a conference, and we had about 30 or 40 people from the community and the group who got together and did something that was just barely a shadow of this. And then when I was a medical student, we had a group we called Medicine and Society, and we would bring speakers together. But again, it was just a very small shadow of what you brought together today. This is really quite an impressive conference that you've put together, and I think you put your stamp on something that's quite important, and I hope that you can continue to do this throughout the years. So congratulations to the organizers and to the school. I want to draw everyone's attention to the screen because I'm going to try to make this a bit interactive. My wife's a college professor, and she gave me a suggestion of using this website called b.socrative, SOCRATIVE.com. So if you take out your phone and you just log into that, we can use your phone like an audience response system. I want everybody, if they want to participate in this, to just go ahead and do that now. Let's see if I can figure out how to advance my slides. Everybody got the website if you want it? Okay. How about that? Okay. So I actually had a lot of difficulty figuring out what I was going to talk about today. I couldn't use a canned talk. I wanted to do something that was different, and I was trying to figure out who's the audience. And Brian told me, well, it's going to be some business students and some people from the med school and some alumni and some faculty and people from other schools at UCLA, people from industry. And I was scratching my head and thinking, what can I talk about that's going to have widespread interest? And I decided, you know what? It's the students. This is a student conference, and actually we're all students. We're all students throughout our whole lives. And I wanted to talk to people about how we can make a difference. What is our own personal role, whether you're at the early stages of your career, and this is sort of like I want to figure out what my trajectory is going to be, or maybe I'm mid-career and I want to figure out what's the next step. In fact, I had breakfast with someone who used to work for me earlier in my career just before this meeting, and that was the conversation we had. What does she want to do with the next stages of her life? We're doing that every day. So I decided to write a talk that would really talk to that specific issue. So American healthcare today is failing. This is kind of the call to action slide. Actually, before we do that, I want to find out who's in the audience, whether I was correct. So if you could toggle back to the other site. Let's see if we can get this up here. The first question I'm going to ask people on their phones is the following. I guess a lot of people have already seen it. Which best describes your current status? It should be on your phone, and you can scroll up a little bit and it'll show the answers. Can you just scroll on the screen, Brian? There you go. Okay. So in fact, I was correct. Most of the folks here are students. We have some practicing physicians, healthcare administrators, UCLA faculty, and more than 20% are entrepreneurs or involved in healthcare business. So it's a nice mix. Can you scroll back up, Brian, and go to the next question? Okay, so it's a nice mix. Business school, med school, faculty, med center staff, and alumni. It's almost evenly distributed. So great. Welcome, everybody. Okay, so that was just sort of warm up. Can we do one more question, Brian? If you go back up. So here's the first question that actually matters. I want people to give their best guess at where we're going to be in 7 to 10 years from now. And again, if you can click there, it'll show the questions on the screen as well as, yeah, now just scroll up. And they should be on your phone as well. So you only get to choose one. And the first one is the ACA has been repealed and we're searching for the next new thing. The second one is half the population is essentially self-serve now, using apps on their phone, websites and other things, and rarely goes to see the doctor. The third one is there's been significant consolidation in the industry between hospitals, medical groups. So we have only a few delivery systems in the state, almost Kaiser-like entities. And the fourth one is the majority of Californians are in a government-sponsored program, whether it's Medicare, Medi-Cal, or Covered California. And the fifth one is not much has changed, and healthcare now costs over $20,000 per person per year. So let's see what we got. Significant consolidation. And in fact, I think a lot of that's happening in Los Angeles, so you guys are seeing it and experiencing it. In fact, UCLA is one of the large entities that has been combining with other delivery systems and becoming one of those really significant consolidated entities. But I think that actually all of these scenarios are quite possible. Probably the one that's least possible, in my opinion, especially in our state, would be number one. That even if something happened legislatively or through the courts to pull back on the Affordable Care Act, that we would still in California move forward. We have legislation here, we have infrastructure here. I don't think that the train is going to stop or move backwards. It may in some other parts of the country, but not here. But I think all those other things, and they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. I gave you only one choice, so you had to pick one. And in fact, if I had to pick, I probably would pick C as well. But I think all of those things are possible, and to some degree they're overlapping. Okay, thanks, Brian. We can go back to the slides. So healthcare is broken, and we all want to fix it. That's why we're all going into or chose to go into healthcare for one reason or another. We want to deal with individuals, we want to take care of people, we want to make their lives better, and we at the same time want to make a system that works as a system. So these are just some sort of cold hard facts about the healthcare system. Some of them I'm sure you already know. Currently, U.S. life expectancy just crossed the 80 years threshold. But that still ranks us 25th among nations in the world, just ahead of Chile and just behind Slovakia. So there's a long way to go. Those countries with the longest life expectancy, Switzerland, Japan, Italy, years longer than Americans on average. The healthcare system is getting harder to use at a time when we crave and expect convenience. So whether we're using our phones or doing other things to make our lives easy to navigate, healthcare still feels very complicated in most instances. Can't speak to it at UCLA. I don't get my care here. I live in the northern part of the state. But it's complicated. It's too complicated for most people. In fact, I think that Covered California in some ways has created more complications. Many people feel less and less connected to their physicians and vice versa. So the distance that we have in many ways is getting broader, is getting larger, not smaller. 9 of 10 doctors, when surveyed, say they would not encourage family members to go into medicine now. And over $1 in $6 in our economy is going toward healthcare. So we've got a huge set of problems to fix. Here's my prescription for how we try, at least initially, to get out of this mess. We work together as opposed to working apart. And that's a really important step. I think David alluded to it in his remarks. Certainly at Blue Shield, where I work today, we have many delivery system partners that we're trying to get closer and closer with and share solutions and build solutions together that are not at cross purposes but are aligned. Aligned from a business perspective, aligned in terms of a personnel perspective with the same goal. The second thing is to build or rebuild the system from the patient's perspective. Exactly what David was talking about, and I believe that UCLA is one of those organizations that's really embraced this approach and done a wonderful job with it. But as he said, we all could get better every day. People used to say that Michael Jordan was the greatest basketball player of all time, but he missed almost half of his shots. So he had to practice every day. And in fact, you could say the same thing in healthcare. No matter how good you are, there's still opportunity to get better. So that 15% that he referenced is one of those examples. The third thing would be to realize we do not have unlimited resources. So not only do we want to be able to build schools and build better roadways and rejuvenate the economy in other ways, but people should not be spending such a huge proportion of their income on one thing in their lives, and only one thing, which is healthcare. So we have to find ways. And by pooling risk and creating insurance, even those of us who are healthy end up paying a lot of money for things that are expensive that other people need. And so when a rare thing has a very expensive treatment, we're all paying for that every day. So in fact, insurance can be looked at as taking a population of people and a pool of money and figuring out how to make that money cover those people best, improve their lives, improve their health the best. And when even a few people in that pool require a lot of the money in that pot, we all got to pay more in order to make the equation work. Realize that we do not have unlimited resources. And then focus, and this maybe is for the innovators, the business people in the room who are thinking about what am I going to do when I get out of business school. Focus on innovations and the reward systems that are focused on solving the key problems in the system. And these are my ideas for what are some of those key problems. Integrating care across venues and providers, anticipating patient needs, empowering patients, making the system more affordable by being good steward of the resources, and finally making care more convenient. All those things are big overarching things that apply in many, many places in the healthcare system. And if you apply these principles to those particular areas, I think that you'll find success and you'll help drive the system in the right direction. So what's your personal stake in this? Everybody's got a path. Everybody's got their own path. I'll give you a little bit of insight into mine. So I would say that my personal mission is to make the healthcare system function more like a system. I underscored the word system. In fact, Artie Southam is here from the Kaiser system, and I would say that's one of the places where it's really working like a system today. The VA, parts of the VA are working like a system. There are other delivery systems in the state and elsewhere in the country, like Geisinger and Intermountain Health, that are working like a system. We need to make it all work like a system. That's kind of what I've been trying to do for most of my career. My professional arc, when I was training, I was asking questions like, why is practice so varied? Which led me to Dartmouth and a group of people who were doing small practice variation, which led to the Dartmouth Atlas. And I asked, well, how do you decide whether some program is a good idea? Should we invest in certain things? And that led me to a group that was doing cost-effectiveness analysis, and I learned that skill. From there, I wanted to try to translate research findings, things that you could see in the literature and some of my colleagues were doing that were showing, hey, if you do this, look how much better care is. And delivering that or putting that into practice so that it wasn't happening in pockets, but it was happening widespread. And so that was an important part of my career. And then trying to create an infrastructure in an organization in order to make that happen in a regular, consistent way by disseminating and measuring its efficacy. I try to apply care management approaches to frail elders at one stage in my career to help elderly people stay independent and at home as long as possible. I've tried to teach and train groups, medical groups around the state, quality improvement, and then to link those improvements to financial rewards like a pay-for-performance system. And now I'm in a place where I use tools, the tools of a large health plan, Blue Shield of California, to address quality and cost management. So that's been my trajectory. Everybody's got their own path. And I think it was Steve Jobs who said, you can't connect the dots looking forward, only backward. Meaning, I couldn't have figured out that I was going to do those things back when I was in med school or before. In fact, when I was an undergrad, I wasn't even interested in going to medical school. But the path makes sense now. People say, wow, you really planned out your career. And I would have to say anything but. But I think I had a mission. I couldn't have described it as I did in that first line there early in my career. But I knew that that was what I was interested in. And so when you get out of school, whichever of the schools you're in, if you've got a mission and you want to try to figure it out, there'll be a bunch of points on your career path. And so that's just one example of that. But I want you to think that way. So the largest group here is in business school, so I thought I should do a couple of cases. That's how you learn in business school, right? So I brought a couple of cases from my most recent bullet point in the last slide, my current work at Blue Shield. So one of the things we've been working on is oncology care. Oncology care has some real problems associated with it. The paradigm of taking care of patients with cancer has changed dramatically in the last 10 to 15 years. It used to be if you knew the organ system and the stage, you pretty much knew what kind of chemotherapy was the right prescription, what was the right treatment. However, today it's all about the signature of every individual's tumor. What does their tumor look like? What are the markers on the cell? What's inside that cell? So you need to know genomics, you need to know markers. It's a much more complicated field, and in fact it's hard for a lot of oncologists to keep up with. If you're really specialized in one particular area, perhaps less so. If you're on the leading edge, say at UCLA, perhaps less so. But across the state, all the oncologists, it's very difficult to keep up. The second thing is that besides cure, patients are looking for other things. And we didn't think at Blue Shield that they were necessarily getting everything that they were looking for. And in fact, we went and interviewed patients and said, gee, what is it that you're looking for and what is it that you're receiving? And they said, oh, the care from the doctors and the nurses is fantastic. It's when I'm not there. That's what worries me. So when I got diagnosed, I had to wait 2 weeks to see the oncologist. Those were the worst 2 weeks of my life. I thought I was going to die. I was scared out of my mind. I had nobody to talk to. Nobody was really considering that part of the oncology experience or the cancer experience. We had people tell us, I understand that I have cancer and I might die, but what would be really terrible is if I died and bankrupted my family in the process. I know this stuff is really expensive. Nobody's talking to me about how much it costs, and I'm worried about that. And so that was another thing that people told us. Or I wake up late in the middle of the night and I'm having some sweats, and I don't know if that's something I need to call and rush to the hospital about, or that's normal for my cancer treatment. So there were a bunch of things that weren't really well dealt with in the current oncology model. How do we help patients whose goal is not cure? So unfortunately, some patients, when they are treated for cancer, either when they get the diagnosis or later on in the course, they're not curable, or at least by modern standards. And so the goals of cure are really important to be able to talk to them about that. Something we talk about, which is a good death. A good death would be where the patient has control over the situation, where the patient is comfortable in the situation, where the patient feels a sense of completeness about their life, where the patient has a sense of closure with those that they care about. That's really different from typical oncology care, but that was some of the things that we heard from patients. And then how do we make oncology a professionally rewarding option so that we'll have the next generation of oncologists if we're thinking about maybe the whole system isn't exactly working the way it should. So we developed something we called Transforming Cancer Care. And we developed this in partnership with several oncology practices. Thank you. So we developed this with several oncology practices around the state so that they would give us their input and implement a program once we put it together. So as I said, we interviewed a lot of patients in their practices. We used something called human-centered design. The business students probably know what that is. I'd never heard of it before we started to use it. That's what my boss says, it's what makes Apple Apple. It's really understanding from the customer's perspective what their needs are. So we followed patients, we interviewed patients, we videotaped patients, and we made sort of small prototypic changes to see how they would respond in order to try to make something that was a different program and a different experience for them. We implemented software to help those doctors who were having difficulty keeping up with this whole new paradigm be more successful in working up the patients completely and giving the most advanced both evaluations and treatments. And then we're currently developing a bundled payment methodology, which is a new way of paying for this so that it rewards doing all the things we just talked about. So it's not the usual fee-for-service, pay for each increment of care, but doing things in a different way. So it's required us to come up with a different taxonomy of what is cancer, because not all the cancers look the same, and so the way we would pay for it varies. And we've had a number of discussions with some of these delivery systems about the best ways to align incentives. So that's an experience that I've had in a very particular area of healthcare through my current work that is one of those things that propels us forward in the kind of spirit that I'm talking about. Given that there's only about 5 minutes left, I'm only going to make very brief reference to a second one, which is doctors need to, not only doctors, all the providers in the care experience need to be able to exchange information in real time. So at UCLA now there's an electronic health record that most providers are on, so they can see the medical information. But a lot of patients may come from far away. The example David gave earlier of somebody coming from Bakersfield. You have no records. When I was practicing a long time ago in Philadelphia, people would come from the hinterlands. What would we do? Repeat the whole workup. We would just start from scratch because we didn't get the records, we didn't believe the records, whatever it was. So there's a whole lot of waste in that scenario. And here, this is a way of connecting all the dots. So if we think about the whole healthcare system as essentially a service model of supply chain management. Everybody is part of the supply chain to deliver complex services to an individual patient, everybody has to be able to see the same information and put information into the same record. And so we have been struggling with this, and within the last 6 months have launched something called CalIndex, where INDEX stands for Integrated Data Exchange. And that is a new statewide, not-for-profit organization to build this kind of information exchange. We've done it now with Anthem, another large insurer, and there are several large delivery systems that are likely to be early adopters and early contributors of data. And I'm glad to say that UCLA is probably tops on the list. In fact, David is the chair of the board of CalIndex, and as we're now sequencing organizations, UCLA is on the top of the list. So a lot of organizations are going to start putting data into this thing, and clinicians will be able to utilize it. Down the road, patients will too, be able to see our own data, even change the data in there or add to that data if they need to. So that's another example of ways that in my career I'm trying to change things. There's a third one here that's around quality management, but I think that 2 cases is probably plenty, and I'd rather stop with the cases and just return to the question of what is it that's in your personal roadmap? What is it that you want to accomplish, and how can you find your path, where the dots are in your career? So this is a slide I showed you earlier, working together instead of apart. So an insurer not looking at a doctor as somebody who's spending too much money or making the wrong choices, but as a partner. A health system looking at an insurer as another set of hands that can help solve problems and build a better delivery system. So these are the kind of things that can build a better healthcare system, and the people that are going to do it are sitting at that table, and that table, and that table, and that table, and that table. So I was optimistic when I started my career. The story I told you at the beginning about trying to put together a conference like this, it was teeny tiny. There was no place to go. There were very few people who wanted to talk about it. Today I look out and I say, oh my gosh, look how many people are interested in this topic and really want to make the healthcare system better. So I'm optimistic that over the next 20, 30 years, there's a lot of good stuff that's going to come out of it. There's a lot of problems, so we got a lot of work to do, but by golly, we're going to fix it together. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.